Northrop Grumman is certainly no stranger to stealing headlines, with legendary platforms under its belt like the world's first stealth bomber, the B-2 Spirit, and rapid progress continuing on America's new stealth bomber, the B-21 Raider. But in recent weeks, a very different Northrop Grumman platform has been dominating discussions online. This very sleek and futuristic-looking submarine seems to reflect an unholy marriage between the billions of dollars Northrop Grumman has invested into their stealthy flying wing aircraft designs and the billions of years worth of evolution reflected in some of the ocean's most graceful deep ocean predators, resulting in a new deep-sea submersible designed to operate for extended durations in deep ocean environments, laying dormant on the seafloor, waiting for a threat to approach. But while nature's manta ray may feed on small fish, shrimp, and planktonic organisms, Northrop Grumman's manta ray has its eye on much bigger prey. Namely, the nuclear ballistic missile submarines of adversary nations, capable of encroaching deep into American territory, potentially undetected, and laying waste to vast swaths of the American mainland in a nuclear conflict. Let's talk about Northrop Grumman and DARPA's Manta Ray submersible, and why it could become the last line of defense in an all-out nuclear war. I'm Alex Hollings, and this is Sea Power. Ground news helps you stay on top of what's going on in the world while also seeing right through the political bias so commonly found in today's media coverage. Ground news does this by compiling articles published by outlets all over the globe and putting them in one place, making it easier than ever to not only stay on top of the news trends, but also to see differences in how stories are covered depending on an outlet's political bias. You can even choose specific topics you want ground news to help you stay on top of, like the military, veterans, or even the F-35. Last weekend, for instance, a Royal Australian Navy helicopter operating over international waters above the Yellow Sea was forced to take evasive action after an intercepting Chinese J-10 fighter not only crossed directly in front of the helicopter as it flew, but deployed flares at the same time, forcing the helicopter to change course for safety reasons. Royal Australian Navy officials have described this interaction as unsafe and unprofessional, and it's certainly not unique. According to the Department of Defense, there were at least 180 similar unprofessional interactions between Chinese military aircraft and American personnel between 2021 and 2023 alone. And ground news makes it very easy to see that some 20 outlets have covered this story so far, with fairly even distribution across the political spectrum, including 7 left-leaning, 5 right-leaning, and 7 center-leaning outlets covering the story. And if you scroll down the page just a bit, you can also get a sense of how factual reporting on this story has been, with 67% of the outlets covering the story thus far being rated for high factuality. And ground news will do a whole lot more than that, including letting you know who actually owns a news outlet covering a story, and letting you know which countries are covering a story and which ones are giving it the silent treatment. Ground news is a very handy tool, not just for my research, but for my day-to-day news consumption, and it can be for you too. Just go to ground.news/Sandboxx to get 40% off the same Vantage plan that I use in my research. Again, that's ground.news/Sandboxx, or just follow the link in the description below to get 40% off the same Vantage plan that I use to stay in the loop. On February 3rd, 2024, just shy of 2 years after Russian forces invaded Ukraine, the Russian Navy rolled out its 5th modernized Boryai-class nuclear ballistic missile submarine from its shipyards in northern Russia. This new class of undersea predator is alleged to be significantly stealthier than previous Russian submarines, thanks to its use of pump jet propulsion, a first for the nation. And as a result of this development, Russian state media has claimed that this new submarine is 5 times quieter than Russia's latest nuclear-powered Akula-class submarines, and at least 2 times quieter than America's own Virginia-class attack subs that would be tasked with hunting this vessel down. With at least 2 more Borai A-class vessels already in production, it's clear that despite Russia's military woes in Ukraine, the country remains heavily invested in maintaining and extending its potent nuclear strike capabilities, on which Russian President Vladimir Putin seems increasingly reliant to stave off direct Western interference with his military objectives. But Russia's undersea fleet may soon be facing a new kind of threat, one that lurks deeper than any of their submarines can sail, hibernating with nearly no detectable electromagnetic emissions, capable of rapidly coming to life and soaring through the sea like an exotic predator with the payload bay of a stealth bomber, taking on submersible threats with a wide variety of potential tools before once again anchoring itself to the seabed to lay in wait once more. On April 8th, Northrop Grumman officially unveiled its new prototype deep-sea drone, the Manta Ray uncrewed underwater vehicle, or UUV. This new undersea drone is designed to conduct extended-duration autonomous operations at long ranges, with minimal need for human support, at least according to Northrop Grumman, making it uniquely suited for a wide variety of deep-sea scientific and very likely combat-oriented operations. Northrop Grumman describes the new Manta Ray drone as, quote, a new class of UUV. It is an extra-large glider that will operate long-duration, long-range, and payload-capable undersea missions without the need for on-site human logistics. Now, details about Manta Ray and its full range of intended capabilities are still fairly sparse, but we can glean some information about the goals informing this endeavor through the contracting documents and announcements released by the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, or DARPA, leading up to this point. This effort really kicked off in earnest back in March of 2020, when DARPA awarded developmental contracts to Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, and Navatech to mature concepts for what DARPA Manta Ray program manager Dr. Kyle Warner described as, quote, an autonomous underwater vehicle that's out operating on its own, harvesting energy and completing whatever mission it's given. By December 2021, the field narrowed to Northrop Grumman and Navatech, now known as PACMAR Technologies, with Phase 2 contracts awarded to each for the construction of full-scale technology demonstrators. In September 2023, PACMAR Technologies' Manta Ray subscale prototype began splash testing, meant to verify the sensor suite and key autonomy behaviors for the forthcoming full-scale platform. And according to a DARPA press release dated May 1st of 2024, Northrop Grumman's full-scale Manta Ray prototype completed its in-water testing off the coast of Southern California in February and March of 2024. Now, these tests were meant to demonstrate, quote, at-sea hydrodynamic performance, including submerged operations using all the vehicle's modes of propulsion and steering, buoyancy, propellers, and control surfaces. I'll quote Dr. Kyle Warner, DARPA's Manta Ray program manager, once again. Our successful full-scale Manta Ray testing validates the vehicle's readiness to advance toward real-world operations after being rapidly assembled in the field from modular subsections. The combination of cross-country modular transportation, in-field assembly, and subsequent deployment demonstrates a first-of-kind capability for an extra-large UUV. And when he said extra-large, he meant it. While images and renders of Northrop Grumman's Manta Ray had been released before, the pictures that came with that May 1st press release were the first to give us a real sense of Manta Ray's scale, as compared to scientists standing on top of the platform and chase boats following behind it. Now, based on the Manta Ray program description, which was also penned by Dr. Warner, the driving factor in this effort was to field a deep-sea drone that could specifically operate for extended durations without the need for human logistical support. While not exactly overtly spelled out in the program's description, it does seem evident based on other statements from people involved in the effort that Manta Ray's priorities are not just extended deep-sea operations with minimal logistic requirements, but specifically the force-multiplying effect of passing off these roles to a drone that doesn't need much in the way of human interaction. I'm going to quote Dr. Warner again. If successful, this new class of UUV will give the combatant commander an amplification of capacity without disrupting current operations by remaining independent of manned vessels and ports once deployed. Now, in order to minimize those logistical requirements, DARPA's documentation calls for novel energy management and even energy harvesting techniques for use in deep-sea environments. In other words, creative new ways to minimize the energy draw and even to supplement the energy stores of this platform using its environment, as well as a wide variety of new onboard systems that are designed to minimize power requirements, from propulsion to threat detection and beyond. A fourth company, Metron Incorporated, has also been contracted to help mature technologies in that specific vein. Another evident element of the Manta Ray program is to operate at extreme depths that would otherwise be impossible or economically infeasible for the Navy or even civilian submersibles. Now, that point was emphasized in an episode of the Voices from DARPA podcast released in October of 2022, when Dr. Warner explained that a main driver for this effort was the ability to go to depths that humans and many human systems are not able to go. Warner went on to explain that DARPA chose the name Manta Ray as it emphasized the program's aim of fielding a disruptive submersible technology that departs from the sleek torpedo-like design that's so common in military submarines, and instead leans into the efficient shapes of undersea life. Now, Warner clarified that DARPA was happy to accept designs that didn't resemble the manta ray found in nature, but Northrop Grumman seemed to take this idea to heart when designing their own submersible, leveraging a sleek manta ray-like design that also bears a bit of a resemblance to the stealth bombers that Northrop Grumman has made famous. And to understand the value that a platform like Manta Ray could provide, it's first important for us to recognize the limitations inherent to current state deep-sea submersible technology. Most of today's uncrewed underwater vehicles are tethered directly to surface vessels for both power and support, and the few that aren't still need to keep support, usually in the form of a crewed ship on the surface, nearby, because the systems can usually only operate for periods of hours, or, in a few extreme cases, days. I'll quote Dr. Warner again. So you can either chase them around with a host vessel, which is expensive and takes a lot of time and requires humans above them, and you have to offer them care and feeding and everything else that comes with that, or you can find a way to extend endurance under the sea. So part of this project, from a military utility perspective, is reducing the burden, if you will, on these human-operated ships. Now, to Dr. Warner's point, the single most limiting factor for UUVs today is power storage. A big submersible requires a ton of power for propulsion alone before you even consider onboard control systems, sensor suites, and any potential payloads. So a significant area of focus for this Manta Ray effort, beyond designing systems with low power requirements, is finding ways to draw power from the submersible's operating environments. And to do so, DARPA's been consulting with people like Kelly Rule, a research and development mechanical engineer with Sandia National Laboratories, who specializes in wave energy conversion, or deriving electrical energy from the power of ocean and river currents. Though Rule, who's serving as an advisor for the overall effort, says there are several other potential avenues for power production under the sea beyond capturing the power of currents. Things like salinity gradient power, which can be derived in a variety of ways, like reversed electrodialysis, or RED for short. Now, explaining exactly how RED can create electrical energy for a submarine is if you'll forgive the pun, way outside my depth. But from my limited understanding, the process seems to use a stack of alternating cathode and anode exchanging perm-selective membranes, with the compartments between membranes filled alternately with freshwater and salty seawater. The difference in salinity between the water generates a voltage over the membranes that can be captured and converted into stored electrical power. Or another potential solution that Northrop Grumman has already been exploring in partnership with renewable energy company Seatrek is the Mission Unlimited Unmanned Underwater Vehicle Station, which requires the deployment of separate thermal energy pods, as they call them, that create electrical energy by harnessing the power of the ocean's thermal gradient, or the mixing of warm and cooler currents. In effect, UUVs like Manta Ray could use the thermal energy pod sort of like an undersea gas station, returning to fill up anytime their onboard energy stores are running low. Now, each of these methods of power production could theoretically be used on their own or in conjunction with one another, with the Manta Ray submersible deriving its own electrical energy from, let's say, ocean currents, but also with a thermal energy pod nearby that it and other UUVs could use to rapidly replenish its batteries when necessary, as well as aiding in communications. And that is a very big deal, because one of the biggest challenges facing any deep-sea platform, whether crewed or uncrewed, is communications. Military platforms that operate on or above the surface of the ocean obviously rely heavily on radio communications, but these standard radio transmissions can't penetrate the ocean's highly conductive salt water. As a result, American nuclear ballistic missile submarines rely on very low frequency, or VLF transmissions, broadcast by massive sprawling antenna complexes positioned in 5 installations around the world. And if those stations are taken out by an enemy attack, the US uses a fleet of specially equipped TACAMO, short for Take Charge and Move Out, aircraft that can deploy 5-mile-long antennas before flying in tight overlapping circles above the ocean to transmit what effectively amounts to a text message to submarines hidden deep beneath the waves. Now, the Manta Ray could certainly be equipped for VLF communications as well, but the insulated connector between the Manta Ray submersible and Northrop Grumman's envisioned thermal energy pod could also accommodate the rapid transfer of data. That uploaded data could then be transferred once again into a smaller device that Northrop calls a data bubble. Now, these data bubbles are then deployed from the energy pod, where they float up to the surface and then use their internal RF satellite communications antenna to transmit that data back to shore via satellite or nearby surface vessel, allowing for a pretty simple and straightforward means for standard communications at regular intervals. Now, of course, all of this also means that an uncrewed submarine meant for extended duration operations needs to be able to operate almost entirely autonomously, with very little direct interaction with the world above. As such, Manta Ray needs to adopt or adapt some means of autonomous control, potentially through the use of advanced AI models. And of course, power production, communications, and autonomy aren't the only challenges that Manta Ray needs to overcome. Novel solutions for things like corrosion control, undersea obstacle avoidance, and the extreme degree of reliability required for extended operations in such unforgiving environments are also focal points for this effort. But if Manta Ray can overcome these challenges, it can have a significant strategic impact on coastal defense. And make no mistake, that is definitely something the US Navy is on the market for. Right now, the United States is facing a growing legion of submersible threats in really every operating theater on the planet, including both Atlantic and Pacific coasts of the US mainland. Despite Russia's poor performance throughout its ongoing invasion of Ukraine, for instance, Russia's undersea capabilities remain among the best in the world, and as such, represent a truly potent threat to American security and interests. Currently, Russia operates 2 classes of nuclear-armed ballistic missile submarines, including 5 Delta IV subs and 8 Bore-class vessels of different iterations. And despite Russia's sanction-based economic woes, production on 3 more of these Bore-A-class vessels continues as I speak. And then, of course, there's Russia's Status 6 Oceanic Multipurpose System, also known as the Poseidon or Canyon Doomsday Torpedo. This high-speed nuclear torpedo is designed to travel distances as great as a reported 5,400 nautical miles. Now that's about 6,200 miles for those of us who aren't pirates, and all while traveling at speeds as high as a claimed 54 knots. That is a shocking 62 miles per hour under the sea, all before lying in wait inside enemy harbors, waiting for the command to detonate its nuclear payload. Now, initial Russian claims suggested that the Status 6 would carry a massive 50 megaton or even 100 megaton nuclear payload, but that has since been revised to a much more realistic 2 megatons or so. Nonetheless, a 2 megaton blast would still be roughly 100 times larger than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. And while initial claims that such a detonation could produce an irradiated tidal wave that would wipe out civilization for dozens of miles inland, more recent analysis has largely disregarded this possibility. But nonetheless, a detonation inside an American harbor would be catastrophic. And if this threat sounds hypothetical to you, you should know that it isn't. In 2017, for instance, a Russian military documentary series alleged that a fleet of Russian Shuka B-class attack submarines armed with long-range cruise missiles were dispatched with orders to take up positions just outside American East Coast ports with U.S. Navy installations. The Russian Navy claimed to have completed this mission successfully, saying that they managed to operate just outside American territorial waters, some 12 nautical miles at sea, without being detected. Now, the United States did not publicly respond to these claims, and for good reason. Had the Pentagon dismissed the Russian claims as false, Russian information operations would have spun that as tacit confirmation that America could not detect their presence. And if the US Navy did indeed detect and track the presence of these Russian subs, revealing that could inadvertently provide some indication as to just what sorts of detection capabilities the US Navy does have, which may prompt renewed investment from the Russian Navy in finding ways to circumvent it. But regardless of the claim's truth, the US Navy very clearly took that threat seriously. Shortly after Russian officials made this claim, Secretary of the Navy at the time, Richard V. Spencer, announced the US was re-establishing its North Atlantic-based Second Fleet specifically to counter emerging Russian threats. This decision echoed sentiments published 2 years earlier by then Naval Forces Europe Commander Admiral James Fago III. I'll quote him now. "Russian submarines are prowling the Atlantic, testing our defenses, confronting our command of the seas, and preparing the complex underwater battle space to give them an edge in any future conflict. Not only have Russia's actions and capabilities increased in alarming and confrontational ways, its national security policy is aimed at challenging the United States and its NATO allies and partners." Now, since then, several means of countering this submersible threat have emerged as adaptations of existing programs, entirely new programs of record, or new developmental and experimental efforts, all aimed at anti-submarine warfare. Just a handful of which include DARPA's Anti-Submarine Warfare Continuous Trail Unmanned Vessel, often known simply as ACTOV, which is an unmanned surface vessel designed specifically to counter submersible threats. The ACTOV program launched in early 2010, but in January of 2018 was transferred from DARPA to the Office of Naval Research for further development toward operational service. And if you thought drone ships hunting submarines sounds like science fiction, 1 month later, DARPA kicked off its Persistent Aquatic Living Sensors, or PALS program. This effort, I kid you not, aims to study natural and modified organisms to determine which ones could best support sensor systems that detect the movement of manned and unmanned underwater vehicles. Put simply, this effort's all about developing the hardware, software, and algorithms required to translate organism behavior into, quote, actionable information. It can then communicate to other platforms to engage those threats. In other words, because sea life is naturally self-replicating and adaptable to its environment, and often capable of sensing the electromagnetic field produced by an encroaching submarine well before it actually arrives, by studying the behavior of this marine life, the U.S. could have a very effective early warning system for submarines entering its territory. But even if this effort and many others work exactly as advertised, the US Navy is still facing one very big challenge, and that is that the ocean is massive. The Atlantic Ocean alone represents some 41 million square miles, and with American territorial waters extending 12 nautical miles out to sea, that means that on the East Coast alone, Uncle Sam has more than 543,000 square miles to keep tabs on. And if you include the West Coast and other American territories, now we're talking 4.133 million square miles of territorial waters for Russian and Chinese subs to be hiding within. So if you were to say assign one warship to every 500 square miles to maintain a vigilant posture, that means you would need some 8,267 ships to do the job of coastal defense alone. Now, the US Navy operates maybe 280 ships at any given time, many of which are forward deployed to other theaters, making coastal maritime defense not just a massive undertaking, but one that's all but impossible to do through traditional means alone. And this is where Northrop Grumman's new Manta Ray system could be an incredibly potent new addition to America's growing anti-submarine arsenal, providing a sustained, weaponized presence that's all but impossible to detect while inactive and hibernating deep beneath the prowling depths of Russian and Chinese submarines. And once such a submarine is detected via any one of the various sensing methods, automated responses in the form of both surface and subsurface platforms like Manta Ray could take immediate action, identifying the submarine, tracking it for other platforms, or even potentially engaging it all on its own, making it harder than ever to sneak a submarine, or nuclear torpedo for that matter, into any American or Allied harbor. Of course, when facing a challenge of this magnitude, no single platform, not even one as advanced and forward-leaning as Manta Ray, can solve this problem on their own. But Northrop Grumman's Manta Ray, or Pakmar Technologies' Manta Ray for that matter, could ultimately prove to be a vital piece of the anti-submarine puzzle. And as exciting and dynamic as Northrop Grumman's Manta Ray prototype genuinely is, maybe the most important statement to come out of DARPA regarding this effort is that they are not putting all their eggs in any one basket. The sheer scope of the challenge and the existential nature of the threat these submarines may pose demands innovation in a wide variety of technological sectors. And I'll close on one more quote from DARPA's Kyle Warner. Manta Ray performers have each taken unique approaches to solving the wide range of challenges related to UUV endurance. To me, this is a clear sign that we are tackling a complex problem without a clear one-size-fits-all solution. And if you ask me, that's exactly what I'd want to hear from someone in his position. And with that ends yet another edition of Sea Power from Sandboxx News. I'm Alex Hollings. Make sure to swing by sandboxnews.com today and every day for all the latest in news, entertainment, and motivation from all around the force. If you got anything out of today's video, make sure to click like and subscribe down below, and leave me a comment so I know what I should cover next. And of course, don't forget to tap on that bell icon so you never miss a drop from Sandboxx News.